Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about what it feels like to be nonverbal as an autistic adult who has experienced both worlds. I feel like I have a little bit of light that I can shed on that. As far as helping the neurotypical community and the verbal autistic community understand what that's like, especially as someone who knows both worlds, someone who is verbal most of the time but has also been verbal for a long period of time. First thing is that what will be kind of common for people with autism to understand more so is going nonverbal, like during a shutdown or something. That is something that is kind of commonly experienced, temporarily, as the shutdown or the meltdown is being experienced as a loss of speech. But what I'm going to share about is more the long-term, full nonverbal, not just caused by the duration of a shutdown or whatever. And I'm also going to try to distinguish it a bit from, explain how for me it is a little bit more exacerbated because it is a kind of symptomatic of my autistic catatonia, and mutism is a symptom of autistic catatonia. So the reason my going nonverbal is more pronounced and prolonged, the duration is longer than what you would typically see for like a shutdown or maybe a selective mutism thing, is because it is a sub-symptom of the catatonia that as long as I'm in that stage of catatonia and still regressing or staying where I am but not getting better, then I don't have speech until something changes there. But for all intents and purposes, I think that it more or less feels the same or presents the same as someone who was fully nonverbal always, or someone who only goes nonverbal for short times, like for shutdowns. How it feels, it's interesting because I feel like the neurotypical community, people who don't understand, or autistic people who've never experienced being nonverbal, would be quick to say that it's that it's selective, that you could talk but you just don't have the energy, or you could but you just don't want to, or that kind of thing, that there is some playroom there of like, well, you could but you can't, you could but you don't want to. And what I want to share is that it's not that way at all. There is no selectiveness for genuine being nonverbal, genuine autistic nonverbal. It's not a selective thing. It's not, I don't have the energy right now, like, it's a literal, your brain, you have a certain number of cognitive resources to use for any given task. And so for an autistic person, once those resources are used up, it's like a computer. You can't just find more somewhere else, or keep pushing and try to find, once they're gone, they're gone. So when someone goes nonverbal, or when someone is nonverbal, they simply just don't have those resources to use, and there's nothing they can do about it. You can't just wish it there. You can't reallocate resources in that respect. But it does work in the sense that there is a bit of reallocation. Like, for example, when I was nonverbal for a long time, it was like maybe 6 months, a little less, first time, and I was signing and everything and communicating in other ways. I did notice that because I wasn't using any cognitive resources to do verbal speech, which for me is already difficult, it freed up this whole bunch of space and this whole bunch of stuff that made a lot of other things way easier. Like, I noticed that I wrote a lot more. I'm a writer, and I wrote a lot more and a lot more frequently, and it seemed to come easier to me, the written word, as it always does. It always has. Written word it comes easier to me for communication. Things like understanding what people say to me, it was a little easier. I mean, there was just it was a bunch of resources, cognitive resources, that were instantly freed up, and it was unbelievable. Like, because if you imagine how many cognitive resources I use day to day just to communicate verbally, as difficult as it is for me, and then to suddenly have those freed up, my sensory, like my ability to regulate was a lot better. My ability to pass as neurotypical, you know, when I was doing that, it was just miles easier when I had those resources free. So being nonverbal is something that, you know, if you're with someone who is autistic and say they go nonverbal during a meltdown or a shutdown, and they're signaling to you that they can't speak, don't get angry with them, don't push them, don't feel personally offended or annoyed or slighted, like they're just being difficult or you know, just demanding treatment, special treatment, and, you know, it really is out of their control. You know, I can't imagine a situation where I would be in that kind of situation, maybe post-meltdown or like during a meltdown or shutdown, where I'd like to communicate with someone to tell them what I need. You know, situations like that, people don't know what's going on. There's a lot of tension and anxiety and stress of people wanting to know what's going on and pushing and trying to get in on the situation, you know, how much more stressful that is, you know, wanting to explain to people what's going on. A, so they don't freak out. B, to like help them help you. C, to make them just give you the space that you need. So like, I can't imagine that happening, a situation happening, and someone wanting to communicate those things as you would, and just selectively not speaking for whatever weird reason. It's not something that, it's not like that. It is very, you know, you don't have it. It's just not there. You know, it's like a computer. You know, if you don't have the USB thingy for the mouse plugged in, the computer's gonna beep at you. Mouth isn't plugged in, and you don't have a mouse until you plug it in. You can't fake it. You know, you can get around and use the keyboard and do other things, but that's still not using a mouse. So someone using AAC and different kinds of communication in lieu of having verbal speech is not the same as, just, you know, it's not the same as using a keyboard instead of a mouse when you don't have a mouse, because it's literally different. If that's making sense, if my computer metaphors are making sense, that's the best way I think of it. It's, for me, I have an interesting experience being able to feel sort of the regression, the loss of speech as I'm losing and going nonverbal. When my catatonia kicks in and I start to regress, I start to have my stutter, and it's very noticeable that I'm losing the ability to make words properly. And so I get to experience sort of that journey from fully verbal to nonverbal as my stutter gets worse and worse, and it gets harder and harder. My word recall gets really bad. It gets to a point where, like, you might notice, I don't know if I've done this in videos or not, but like if I'm really tired and I'm struggling to say a word, if I sign the word or I fingerspell the word, you know, that I can't recall to say, then I can say it, you know, or I'll write it and I don't have issues. So I get to kind of experience that journey towards being nonverbal, and so that gives me interesting insight to feel what it feels like and to share that it's an absolute loss of skill. I literally do not have that skill to speak verbally. It is nothing about, oh, I'm just stressed, or oh, I'm just being selectively mute, or oh, if I calmed down a little bit, I'll feel better, I'll be able to speak. It's a hysteria, you know. It's not like that at all. It's literally not there anymore. So try to keep that in mind when you're dealing with people who experience that, going nonverbal, or just knowing how to help someone you know who does go nonverbal, giving them the kind of grace and the patience to know that it's not selective at all. There's nothing they can do about it, and the more you push them, the longer it's going to take for them to get that skill back. And also be cognizant of the fact, like, say one, you know, first time I went nonverbal was like 6 months. The second time it was a couple months, you know. It really just depends on how fastly I can recover in my situation. So if someone goes nonverbal during shutdown or after a meltdown, and it's 10 minutes one time, and the next time it's 10 days, you know, don't make a fuss about that. Like, you know, it's not science, you know. It's not a piece of grid paper that you can map out and mark every symptom every time is going to be this way. Autism isn't like that. and every person with autism isn't like that. We aren't a grid. We're not a piece of grid paper you can stack us against and make sense of. Excuse me, sorry. So those are my thoughts on being nonverbal, what it feels like. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. And that's all I've got today for you, my friends. Stay classy, stim freely, and I'll catch you next time.